Let's start all over again. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to the Monday, October 17th, 2022 meeting of the Falls Church City Council. We're delighted you're all with us this evening. Before we get started, I'm going to ask the Assistant City Manager to call roll.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Connolly?
Here.
Mr. Duncan?
Here?
Ms. Hardy?
Here.
Ms.
Here.
Ms. Shawn-Hiscott?
Here.
Mr. Snyder?
Here.
Mayor Tarter?
Here.
Thank you, Mayor. In essence, we're an in-person meeting. We don't have to do the virtual notice.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So let's get right to it. Our first item on the agenda is the West Falls Church Senior Housing SESP amendment. Mr. Shields, do you have any introductory remarks either you or staff would like to make?
I will, and then I'll turn it over to Paul Stoddard for a brief staff report. And then we will hear from the development team with TC Trammell Crow Mid-Atlantic, and they are the developer of the senior component of the West Falls project. The City Council referred this out last spring to boards and commissions, so we're here to report back on comments from boards and commissions and how the developer has addressed those comments. The staff recommendation is to schedule this for final consideration at your upcoming meeting on October 24th. We look forward to council's direction on that at the end of our discussion today. I will now turn it over to Mr. Stoddard, who will hit some of the highlights of the staff report. And from there, we'll introduce the development team and then Q&A from there. Mr. Stoddard.
All right. Thank you, Wyatt. Thank you, Mayor Tarter and members of council. First, I want to start by expressing my appreciation for our senior planner, Emily Bazemore, who actually prepared the report for your all's packet tonight. Unfortunately, she took ill earlier today, so she wasn't available to be here for the meeting, but I know she very much wanted to be. But I'm happy to present her work, even though she couldn't make it tonight. So I'll walk through some of the key points of the staff report, especially touching on history and recent changes. So first off, the request line, starting there on line 2. This is expected to be council's final work session before your scheduled final consideration at your next meeting next Monday on October 24th. The staff recommendation there at line 8 is from staff is to proceed as scheduled. As noted in the subsequent paragraph, this has been reviewed by the boards and commissions, and they all made positive comments on the project, and is detailed in the staff analysis. The project is consistent with the city's goals in the comprehensive plan and the requirements of the SEE, the Special Exception Entitlement, and the Special Exception Site Plan SESP code. I'll step through background here. So as Wyatt already mentioned, the applicant is TC Mid-Atlantic Development. Jumping down to line 24, just to make sure people know where this is on the map. Oh, I'm sorry. It's line 24 in the Word document, but if we scroll down a bit into the staff summary, let's see, I'm going to do some quick math. I just got to add 20 lines to everything. So if we go to line 44, there we go. So we've got Trammell Crow Mid-Atlantic is the applicant. The site is what's known as the D1 block, but I don't expect everyone to memorize that. It's at the corner of the Commons, West Falls Station Boulevard, and then Mustang Alley within the new approximately 10-acre development. The site itself that we're talking about tonight is about 0.76 acres of that larger project. Building and uses starting on line 53. It's building height up to a maximum of 15 stories and approximately 267,000 square feet of uses, with 260,000 being senior residential in a various breakdown of units. And then on line 60, about 7,700 square feet of ground floor retail uses. If we go down to, it'll probably be line 90. There we go. The land use actions requested, line 91. As I mentioned earlier, the item before council is to review and for your next meeting is to review and take final action on the requested SESP Just a reminder to council, this is part of a two-step entitlement process that council approved for the larger West End development. Step 1 was the SEE, Special Exception Entitlement, there on line 96, which laid out the basic layout, heights, and general uses of the various sites within the larger project. And then step 2 on line 97 is the SESP, Special Exception Site Plan, for the individual or grouping of buildings. SEE is the larger framework. SESP is the technical approval, which is equivalent to a site plan and other projects. I want to go down to application status, which will probably be line 126. 126. There we go. Ooh, I'm getting better. So 126, this was previously reviewed by council. Although this goes back a little further than this project in particular, just a reminder to set the framework. July 2019 is when council approved the first SEE for the larger site. Line 136 is when council approved an SEE amendment, as well as the special exception site plan for the rest of phase 1. The senior housing building was still completing final design, so it wasn't ready to be grouped in with the SESP at that time. Jumping forward in time, to line 154. Ooh, great. Here we go. So the first submittal for the senior housing building specifically was made to the city in February of 2022. After work sessions on it, council did refer it out to boards and commissions in April of 2022. And that referral was made to the groups that would typically see a site plan application, the AAB, the Architectural Advisory Board, the Economic Development Authority in their role as landowners of the property, the Planning Commission, as well as the Urban Forestry Commission, are the 4 groups to which the application was referred. The board and commission reviews, you can see that beginning on line 165. Comments from the 4 groups are summarized and attached. I'll jump through those sections since they're already provided to the council. Line 276. Advances us to the close of that board and commission review process. So this is when the applicant made their second submittal, and that was in June of 2022. Submission 2 was responsive to the board and commission feedbacks, and that's really the value of that referral process. Council makes sure the general shape is okay, send it out to the boards and commissions who look at it for their specialties, and then the applicant has the opportunity to benefit from the variety of those reviews. And so that's what was captured in that second submittal. And then prior to bringing it back to council in July of 22, the applicant had requested a deferral while they worked out final materials for the architectural components of the building. In September of 2022, starting on line 287, applicant did make a revised submittal, updating some of the architectural pieces of the building. Staff did meet with the applicant prior to their resubmittal, and staff at that time determined that the changes, which I'll step through in a moment, were small enough that they didn't require a re-referral to the city's boards and commissions. If we jump down to 96, there we go, 298. This bulleted list here is a summary of of changes that the applicant made between submittals 2 and 3. I'll just step through them briefly. 298 was a change to the detailing of the windows on the ground floor to match the rest of the windows in the building. 300 is a changing to a screening wall. There's an outdoor space for the memory care units on the 3rd floor of the building, and the building facade was changed. But again, it's up on the 3rd floor. 302, there's a bridge connecting the building to the shared parking garage behind it. The exterior design of that was changed. Then 304 and 306 are changes to the way the roof, and 308 are changes to the uppermost floors, reduction in the floor area of the topmost amenity space, as well as changes in the facade materials for the mechanical screen. And then 310 and 311 note changes that are interior to the building. The staff analysis, oh, now I got to carry my digits. 298, what is that, 318? 321, oof. Terrible at math. So this is the staff analysis, which I won't walk through in detail, but I will summarize the documents and policies and codes that were reviewed. Staff did review the application against the city's the SEE and the SESP code, which include the special exception and site plan code. Staff reviewed it against the comprehensive plan, the applicable small area plan, as well as the city's urban design guidelines, and found the project to be satisfactory against all of those documents. So I'm going to jump several pages in the staff report down to the fiscal impact, which is around line 710. There we go. Ooh, 715. So the fiscal impact was carried over from the larger SEE project. Of course, the larger 10-acre site has been approved for its uses and programming as a whole. And so the component parts aren't reviewed independently because they're all considered contributing to the larger project. And any minor changes made in the project since the SEE approval weren't considered by staff to have affected the fiscal impact. Timing section, I already walked through the history of that. Just want to reiterate that this is scheduled for council's final consideration at your next regular meeting on Monday there it is, Monday the 24th. With that, I'll pause the I'll conclude the staff report there. And as Wyatt noted, the applicant team is here and available to give a presentation as well.
All right, thank you very much. Anything else to add, Mr. Shields?
No, not at this time. And so if we could turn things over for a presentation of the project by the development team. And maybe I'll turn to Bill Brewer and ask if he would introduce the team.
Absolutely. First of all, our pleasure to be here in person. Great to be back and doing these things as a group. So I'm Bill Brewer. I work with Trammell Crow Company on our development and investment management team. I've been running the day-to-day operations for our West Falls Senior Living project. So we're very excited to be close to the finish line. And I'm joined with Matthew Allman, who is our lead land use and zoning counsel, as well as Gary Steiner, who is a principal at Perkins Eastman and is the designer of all of our different senior living projects. So I will turn it over to Matt if you have anything else you want to say for an introduction, and then I think you've got thoughts on the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And it's so nice to be here with you in person finally after years of virtual hearings. It's really great to be back, and we're very excited to be here, particularly for this project. Before we share our presentation slides, I just want to thank the city staff for all of their hard work and for all of their collaboration with our team throughout the entitlement process. It's really been wonderful to work with them. We've gotten great feedback on this project, and they've just done a really excellent job helping us go through the commission review process. And I think we have a much stronger project for it, which is always the goal of any entitlement process, to come to you with a better product than where we started. So we'll go ahead and get into the slides. I'll talk for just a moment about the history of the West Falls project, just as a refresher for anyone who may be a bit newer to it or anyone who's listening online who may not be as familiar with the background. And then the bulk of our presentation will be done by our design team, and we'll focus on architectural changes between the first work session when we saw you in April today. You'll see that those changes are relatively minor, but that's really the bulk of what we have to present this evening. Next slide. So Mr. Stoddard went through the timeline in his presentation, but this is just a little refresher of the major milestones for the West Falls project, really starting in earnest in 2019 with the execution of a comprehensive agreement between the city and master developer. The original SEE approval dates back to July of 2019, and then last August there was an SEE amendment as well as a special exception site plan for the bulk of the development. And as part of that approval, there was sort of a pro forma placeholder development program approved for the senior living building, but not any actual architecture or design. It was a little bit of a placeholder with even some footnotes saying that the applicant will come back later and present to you the senior living building. A little more recently, we have selected SRG, Senior Resource Group, as the operator for the building, and very excited to have them on the team. And they bring a lot of a lot of experience and resources to bear, and they've done wonderful work in a bunch of different locations across the country, and happy to have them as a partner here. Next slide. We've added this slide to our presentation just to show you where we've been and where we are. I won't go through every single number on this. It's more for reference. But on the far left of the chart, you will see the minimum and maximum development criteria approved as part of the SEE. Those of you who are familiar with the project know that there were minimums and maximums for things like height and density, unit count, etc., that set up the acceptable range for what could be permitted for the senior housing building. In the middle column, you see the August 2021 conceptual development program. Again, that was sort of approved on paper without any actual design to accompany it. And then on the far right, you see where we are today. And again, I won't go through every single number, but the key takeaway for everyone's purposes is that the retail density, the residential density, the unit count, all falls very comfortably within that minimum and maximum target range that was established with the initial SEE back in 2019 and amended in 21. A little bit further down on the slide, we've added a footnote or two just calling out a few statistics that have changed from the April work session to now. That's in the bottom left. It's an addition of 11 units to the building. The GFA has really remained essentially the same, and then some additional bike parking as well. Next slide, please. These are images from the approved SEE drawings. I won't spend much time on them. They're more here for reference, but you can see the footprint of Block D1 highlighted in the pink rectangle. And if you continue through the next slides, these will show you the streetscape and block structure that was approved back in 2019 and amended in 2021. During the course of the commission review, we got a lot of questions about the streetscape design and how does the senior living building fit in the overall context of the block structure. So we wanted to include these slides just as a reminder of what was approved for the entire development, and just to note that we aren't proposing any changes to the streetscape or to that block structure. Our project really focuses on the four walls of the senior living building itself and is keeping all of these details and all of this good design work in place. Next slide. And this is just a slightly zoomed in view. You can see the detail of that streetscape around building D1 a little more clearly. Next slide. At this point, I'll turn it over to our design team to walk you through those architectural changes and talk about how the building has evolved a little bit since that April work session, and then I'll have a concluding comment or two towards the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. This is Gary Steiner. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. What I want to try to do in the next 15 minutes or so is to walk you through the changes that have occurred to the project since you last saw it, which was roughly 6 months ago. Many of these changes have been seen by the referral commissions and most recently the Planning Commission in June, and they opined on much of what you're going to see today. So if we start in the upper left-hand corner, which is the basement floor plan of the building, which is underground and has always been our service level with amenity, utility entrances and back of house support space. The one thing in particular that we've done here, we increased bike parking capacity because we finally settled on a bike parking metric, which was to use the hotel use for this building. But secondarily, the transformer vault location, which is shown in the upper left-hand corner of the building, which is still our primary intended location for this, which is underneath the alley that runs between the D1 parcel and the D2 garage. We're asking for flexibility in the approval that that location for the vault might occur somewhere along the front side of the building, in the area at the bottom of the diagram that says allow future transformer vault location. This is not to say that the vault will end up there. We're still working on the engineering details with getting the road or the alley constructed and making sure that we provide clear access way for trucks to service the grocer who will be in the adjacent parcel. But this is just to ensure that this approval will suffice for either location. If we go to the other diagram on this page, the ground floor plan, the primary changes on this floor were really just minor layout revisions. However, we also want to ask for flexibility on this floor plan in the event that construction tolerances, when we're building this building with the alley for the grocery trucks already in place, have to encroach upon that clear width for the trucks to navigate the alley. We may need to come and actually pull the exterior wall on the top side of the page, which is the alley side, into the building footprint, a maximum of 10 feet. And that would possibly occur on the first and second floors.
Can I
So,
interrupt you and just ask one question? When you're referring to the alley, are you referring to Mustang Alley or the road between D1 and D2?
The road between D1 and D2.
Okay.
Mustang
Thank you,
Alley
thank
would
you.
remain untouched, yes.
Thanks.
So if in fact that were something that we have to do once our construction company is on board and they've worked out construction sequencing, we would just pull that wall in and reallocate space and make some changes to the floor plans. Next page, please, Mr. Stoddard. On the second floor, what has changed here is that we have added 4 independent living units. So there previously had been an open space with a 2-story space that looked down into the lobby and the dining room of the senior living community. And that was a very, very tall space. So we opted to fill that in with 4 extra independent living units. And then this floor, the second floor, was also very tall, probably in the neighborhood of 20 feet before we made some changes. So we actually inserted a mezzanine level between the second and third floor, which is the lower diagram on this page. And that also availed us the opportunity to add 4 more independent living units. So as Mr. Allman had mentioned, we have added 8 independent living units, and that happens here on the second floor in the mezzanine level. Can we go to the next page, Mr. Stoddard? Thank you. The top diagram is the memory care floor. It's the 3rd floor. There are no changes to this floor. It functions the same, has the same number of units, same square footage. We really haven't changed it at all. The 4th floor, which is the first floor of the assisted living function, which is half of amenity and support space and half in residential units for assisted living. The only change we've really made on this floor is we converted a small amount of amenity space in the upper right-hand corner to an additional assisted living unit. Next page, Mr. Stoddard. Thank you. The top diagram is for our 5th and 6th floors. Those are the residential floors, assisted living only. And the change that we made to each of these 2 floors was that the unit, which is on the lower edge of where the elevator core is, sort of on the left-hand side at the bottom of the diagram, had been amenity space on each of these 2 floors. And now we have made it into an additional residential unit on each of these 2 floors. So that comprises 3 additional assisted living units in addition to the 8 independent living units that we mentioned a moment ago, for a total of 217 units. The floors 7 through 14, which are our independent living units, are unchanged from what you have seen in the past. Next diagram, please. And then the top diagram is the 15th floor, which is our amenity floor. And a couple things that we did here, we rearranged the layout of the plan, but we also reduced the square footage of the floor plan and increased the amount of green roof and bioplanter area to make sure that we could be compliant with stormwater management regulations, and also to use those square footage reductions for other allocations within the building that we just talked about. And then lastly, the roof plan, which is our mechanical penthouse floor, has additional green roof, vegetated roof areas. And we've gone to the extent of showing the location of the HVAC units that will serve the retail on the first floor. So those are the two little white boxes sort of on the lower right-hand corner of the diagram, where we've allocated specific space for a makeup air unit and an exhaust unit for the kitchen hoods, should there be a restaurant in that retail space. So those are the changes to the floor plans of the building. Aesthetically, next page, please. When we last met, we had made the decision to go to a gray and white, or a light gray and dark gray colored building that was made out of architectural precast. And that was the image that you see on the right, on the left-hand side of the page. So we had changed from a red and tan brick building to a light gray, dark gray precast building, and that was met with, I believe, a lot of accolades. And the changes that we've made, which you can see on the right-hand side, are quite minor in nature. There are no openings in the rooftop screen, which Mr. Stoddard mentioned in his staff report. We've changed the railing structure at the front of the third floor memory care terrace to one that was partially masonry and partially glass to one that was primarily glass. And then the other thing is we changed the fenestration on the base of the building. So from floors 6 down, primarily to incorporate the mezzanine level, which as you can see, if you blink, you really cannot see the differences between the two buildings, because we intentionally tried to keep it consistent with what was previously approved. If we go to the next page, the other view that we've rendered for the building, again, the same changes that are in the first diagrams are in these diagrams, where we've changed the screen wall at the top of the building, we've changed the memory care terrace railing, and we've changed the fenestration at the base of the building to reflect the mezzanine level. Again, it's very consistent with what had been approved before, and there's no changes in materiality, just a little bit of proportion. The building is 187 feet tall. By inserting the mezzanine level, it grew 3 feet, but not a significant and certainly not a visually noticeable amount. And then the last slide we have indicates something that Mr. Stoddard had mentioned in the staff report, which is the move for the connecting bridge, which you see between our building and the white box, which is the D2 garage, which previously had been designed in a language that was commensurate with our building. And instead, we changed it to a language that was more commensurate with the garage and with the connecting bridge that went from the D2 garage to the residential building. I don't remember what the parcel name was, but now this bridge really relates more to the other bridge, which makes a lot of sense. So those are the changes that have been made to the project since the last time that this council has seen it. With that, any questions for me or Mr. Brewer, Mr. Allman?
I think, why don't we hold the questions just for a moment and finish the presentation, then we'll go through them all maybe.
Thank you. That sounds great. We only have an additional slide or two.
Okay.
If we could get the next slide, please. Okay, so I won't spend time on this. This is just a statistical summary of the project. The most important chart on this one, if you care to look at it, either on the screen or afterwards, is the average unit size. If you recall, when the council approved the sort of pro forma development program in August of 2021, there was a request for additional residential GFA, and in the second row down, you can see how that leads to a larger average unit size. That was ultimately the decision that the Trammell Crow made, was the appropriate use of that residential square footage was for the residents themselves in their private units, and having larger, more generous units as opposed to having a more over-amenitized building. That's the trend that Trammell and others have seen coming out of the pandemic for these senior living buildings and how they're designed and programmed. Next slide, please. So just a brief word on our Planning Commission hearing. The Planning Commission had 3 recommendations in their motion for us, and actually one that was made in writing shortly before the hearing. I'll just let you know what those recommendations were and how we've changed our project to accommodate those recommendations and requests. So the first one I think is the one we struggled with, candidly. It had to do with the importance of building programming and ensuring that the programming for the residents is very thoughtful and well integrated with the rest of the development. We certainly recognize the importance of programming and share many of the Planning Commission's sentiments about how important that is to a healthy and well-functioning building. I think where we struggled was what is the appropriate deliverable in the context of a zoning entitlement process that could be submitted to demonstrate what that programming might be or how it might look or feel. A lot of times those are developed closer to the delivery of the building and often in consultation with the tenants themselves, taking into account things that are going on in the surrounding area. And they evolve over time, right? The programming at delivery of the building may not be what it is a year or two later. But what we were able to accommodate in our voluntary concessions is a specific commitment to have an on-site liaison to the school system in particular, to make sure that there's open lines of communication between the management of our building and the nearby school, and to explore opportunities for programming where it makes sense and it meets the needs of the tenants and it can be accommodated within the physical envelope of the building, taking into account all of the health and safety considerations that we would have as a senior living building. The next recommendation had to do with our TDM plan and a recommendation to have an on-site coordinator to help manage our parking and some of the information that's shared with residents and help encourage that multimodal transit and ensure that folks are taking advantage of not just single occupancy car trips, but all of the transit options that are available in this area. We were able to accommodate that request, so you'll see that in our most recent TDM plan. The next 2 recommendations had to do with sustainability, particularly a request for electric appliances in the units themselves. We were able to accommodate that request. And finally, there was a request for achievement of a 20% energy reduction against a LEED baseline level. That's another request that we were able to accommodate after taking a look at it, and ultimately our design team felt comfortable that that could be achieved. So that's a new addition to our voluntary concessions as well. Next slide. Just a final word on all the benefits being delivered by the building. It's a very exciting project, critical component of the West Falls project. The senior housing units in particular are needed not just here but across the region. The architectural design is really excellent. We've got a first-rate design team working on the project. There's a financial contribution to the city's affordable housing programs, green building and sustainability measures, which I mentioned a little bit about just a moment ago. We have the TDM plan, which has evolved throughout the process to include more building-specific and on-site components. Construction management plan to make sure that the site builds out in a way that is efficient and minimally burdensome for a big project. The community liaison to the school system, which I mentioned a moment ago, and just overall contribution to the city's economic development and economic tax base. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and we've got our design team available remotely for questions, and we're happy to answer any questions as well.
All right, well, thank you very much. We appreciate that fine presentation. Let's go ahead and open up to questions and comments from council. Ms. Connolly?
Thanks, Mayor Charter. Thank you for the presentation. It's always good to see how it's going to look and think about what it will be like when it stands there. 2 questions. One is for staff, and which is the name of the street on slide 14. It says that it's the Magnolia side of the building. I thought we were not going to use Magnolia. thought that was the recommendation of the city council back when we did street approvals.
So the city council did adopt the names, and I don't recall the specifics.
We approved Magnolia? I'm looking at Mr. Duncan because okay. Okay, all right, cancel that question. All right. Do we? No, we went ahead, okay. It was either slide 15 or 16, the first slide with the chart there. If I'm reading correctly, and I was having a hard time reading it, it looks like the amount in this new submission, the amount of retail goes down from 10,000 square feet to 7,000 square feet?
Yes, that's correct. So the first floor of this building is pretty challenged from a space standpoint. For the seniors program, we have to have the restaurant because it makes a ton of sense to have the restaurant and the kitchen adjacent to the loading dock. So we worked with Hoffman, who's the master developer, to reduce the size of the retail. There's a minimum retail requirement from like a site-wide perspective that at 7,700 square feet we still meet. So we've been squeezing that down just to make our program work.
So when you say the seniors program restaurant, is that for the residents of the building or for?
Yes.
Okay, can you go back to the first floor just to give us a little walkthrough of what the first floor looks like?
Yep.
Yeah, it's early.
And Gary, maybe if you could help walk everyone around the first floor and just orient
Sure.
everyone to the uses. Thank you.
Yeah, so
We can't read the key. We're having.
Okay,
it's
so the aqua color, next floor, thank you
Right
very
there.
much. So the aqua color on the right-hand side, those two big blocks of space, retail 1 and retail 2, are the 7,700 square feet of retail. The purplish color in the middle of the building, sort of running vertically, is all of the shared spaces in the building that cater to at least more than one function. So we have a loading dock, a trash room, exit stairs and exit corridors, fire command room, and a service elevator that goes up to the roof where we can access all the rooftop equipment that serves both senior living and the retail space. The gray color, the large block in the back, is the commercial kitchen, which needs to be adjacent to the loading dock. And that kitchen serves the senior living restaurant, which is the large pinkish space on the left-hand side. And then as we continue sort of in a counterclockwise way, the living room, parlor, amenity space on the front of the building is next to then the entry vestibule and the senior living circulation in the yellow color. So that's sort of how the floor lays out. But the resultant retail square footage is 7,700 square feet.
And Mr. Brewer, you said that fits within the entire retail plan that Hoffman put forward, that 7,700 square feet.
Yes.
Right, thanks.
Yes.
Council member, if it's helpful, I can jump in and confirm that is something that the planning staff has been monitoring, making sure that the site-wide totals when we sum across the buildings does match what council did approve as part of the SEE packet.
And then one more question. The last time we looked at this, you had made some adjustments because of the COVID-19 pandemic to make sure that there was space inside the building. I'm wondering if the new units you've added have affected that space for relatives to visit it with our new health concerns.
So we obviously made changes. The biggest thing when we were going through and thinking about the programming and the extra square footage was we wanted to have bigger units along with an appropriate amount of amenity space. And the thought is in one of these buildings, let's say you have an outbreak, whether it's the flu or COVID or just, any sort of, frankly, respiratory illnesses are always pretty tough. you want to give people an option to stay in their own units and have them be comfortable and safe there, and they can stay there for a couple days, and everyone can be self-quarantining, however they may want to. So that was where we used up most of the square footage. We do have significantly more amenity space than I would have imagined would have been programmed in that prior building, even though probably the biggest percent change is what you would find in the units. So to that end, when we think about the public spaces in this building, we think they're pretty generous, and they're located throughout the building. So if residents, were meeting family, they have space on the first floor all the way up to the rooftop.
Thank you.
All right, other comments? Ms. Leon?
Thank you. Could I please get some clarification or breakdown of the 27 units total? Which is independent versus what's assisted living?
I think it is 140 independent living, 55 assisted, and 22 memory care. And the driver there is at least 60% of the units have to be independent living, and I think we're at like 64 and a half, something like that.
Got it.
Right.
And just to tag on Mary Beth's question, can you clarify for the amenity spaces, where are they? Because I heard conversion of the 20-foot ceiling mezzanine to add another floor and converting that space to independent units. So
Yeah.
how many where are the amenity spaces now? I think I heard it
Yeah.
on the
so,
top floors and eliminated in the second and third.
So we have amenity space on the first floor. We still have amenity space on the second level on the back half, and some of that space is also used for offices, both administrative and sales. And then moving up, you then have dedicated amenity space for memory care units on the third floor, as well as dedicated space on the fourth floor for assisted living. We had thought about including a small amount of amenity space on each of the assisted living floors. We did remove that in lieu of an additional unit on those floors, and then you get another really large chunk of amenity space at the top of the building.
And thank you for incorporating Planning Commission comments. I know EDA also had comments. I think out of respect for Urban Forestry Commission, they provided 3 comments, but I didn't see, I couldn't gauge what your reaction was to their board review comments. Maybe I missed it in the staff update.
Yeah, that's a good question. So we met with the commission. They did provide feedback to us, and many of their comments were picked up in, I believe, our either second or third submission. So perhaps when we come back next week, we'll have a slide that goes through that in a little more detail. I know that we were able to accommodate, I believe one of the requests was for meeting the minimum target of vegetated area on the top floor, which I know that we do. I don't want to riff or ad-lib on exactly their other 2 comments, so I'll take a moment to look those up, and I can speak to those.
And Paul, did I miss it? Because there's 22 pages on the staff update. Was it included in a?
I'll have to take a look. I think what we probably owe you for next week is something that staff typically prepares, and that's something sort of along the lines of a comment response table up at the top of the staff report, where we can break out for you what were the board and commission requests and how is the application packet responsive to those.
Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sure, thank you
Yes.
very much. I'm sorry? Okay. Thanks very much. Question for staff. What are we projecting for the revenue net fiscal returns from this project? And if you could break it down by tax type.
So in the staff report, we have the fiscal impact analysis of the full phase one. And I don't know that the staff report has the breakout of the different components. We could get that to the city council, but I don't have that in front of me for this meeting. Mr. Stoddard, is it in there? I was looking for it, but I think, so it is broken out individually? Yeah, so for the entire project, it's the $5,055,000.
When you say entire project, you mean the entire site?
The phase one is the net fiscal impact.
But
is
how
$5
about
million.
for this particular building?
And so that's the number I don't have for you tonight, but I will go back through the records where it was broken out by component, and we can get that information.
That would be great, and updated based upon the new information. In fact, the developer a few minutes ago said the net fiscal impact was greater as a result of their changes, so I'm just trying to figure out what that is. And is there any possibility that the operation of this could go tax exempt in the future? And can we stipulate that that not occur?
So let me get back with you on that question. Okay. It is not our understanding that it can go tax exempt.
It can?
It is our understanding that it cannot.
Okay, if you could confirm that, that would be really helpful.
Sure.
Second major area of my concern relates to life safety, fire safety. Mr. City Manager, has the fire marshal signed off on this plan? And has there been enough expertise available to the fire marshal to not do just the minimum, but the maximum possible? And I would note that this is by far the tallest building in the city of Falls Church. Now, clearly, you don't have to go very far down Route 7 to find taller buildings, but my point is, considering the occupancy here, the fire safety ought to be at a very, very high level, not just the minimum required. So I wonder if the developer could comment on that, the expertise that they brought to bear, and tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bill, would you like me to handle that?
I was going to kick it over to Perkins Eastman's National Practice Leader for Senior Living Architecture and Design. Gary, you want to go through it?
Sure. Early on in the review process, the fire marshal's office did comment on the drawings, and we did incorporate all of the things that they asked us to take care of. But in addition to that, I will say that this building is a concrete building. It is a fully non-combustible building, and it's going to be designed to an occupancy classification called I1 Condition 2. And being an I occupancy, which means institutional, it carries with it higher life safety requirements than it would if we were to design it to an R occupancy. And the independent living residential portion of the building could be designed as an R occupancy, which is what you would use for apartments or condos. So yes, we are in fact designing to a higher standard.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, I would just ask the next time this comes before us for final action that we have a fire marshal review based upon the initial report and the changes that they made, and a certification of approval from the fire marshal.
Okay, well, let me ask Mr. Snyder, who might have some additional information just on plan review. There is a very intense plan review process that occurs after entitlement, and we're still in the entitlement phase with this site plan. But Jim, could you just speak to the building official and the fire marshal's review of the plans to date?
Yes, Mr. Manager and Mayor and council members, this will go through a very extensive review of the building plans in every detail. This will probably be the most scrutinized building in the city. It is concrete construction. It has life safety issues. J.D. Martin, who is our fire expert plan reviewer, will be looking at this very closely. So it will go through a much more detailed review of the building plans, all the details of locking and fire sprinkler systems. There's a lot of nuances that go into the life safety issues when you have seniors and you have memory care and other kinds of special populations. So it will be looked at extremely carefully, and they will not get permits until we are happy with all of those results. But I can give you more detail. I'll talk with our building official and fire folks before this comes back to you. This will be looked at very, very carefully. The fact that it's a concrete building of this quality is a big plus for the city compared to a building of different kind of construction methods.
Okay, thanks for that. And I thought it was very important to get this discussion on the record and also to get what additional information we can before we move it through the process. And do I assume the cladding on the outside of the building is non-flammable and is otherwise absolutely capable of preventing the spread of fire like we saw in the London building a couple years ago?
Gary, again.
Yes, sir, it is. It's architectural precast, so it in fact is concrete as well.
Okay, thanks very much. And I just make the final comment that the fact that the building is concrete is great, but interior furnishings can burn. And my greatest concern is that we have the maximum degree of life safety in this building considering the occupancy. So thanks much for that, and I'll appreciate information on the financials. Thank you.
All right, so one of the two of you, Ms. Hardy and then Mr. Duncan.
Thank you. Since people went before me, a lot of my questions actually were covered. So thank you for being responsive on the Planning Commission's comments. Normally, since site plan is in their purview, I wanted to make sure that all their comments were addressed. So thank you for being responsive on those. On urban forestry comments, I think the bird strike ones were the ones I was interested in. And so when you prepare kind of your responses to those, especially in light of the changes you all recommended on the architecture, whether that addresses the concerns that were raised at UFC, that would be terrific.
I can address that. So,
Sure.
We do not see any need to change kind of glazing for the building relative to the fenestration. It pretty significantly reduces the quality of the resident experience because it does really impact the views through the windows. And one of the things that is unique about the building, as we've just discussed, is the height, and that's been part of what's kind of underpinned everything. So we would very much like to avoid changing the fenestration.
Does it meet some sort of, I don't know much about bird strikes and windows, but does it meet some sort of standards?
So Gary, if you would kind of address kind of what we've designed to, and we've designed to very modern Class A standards. So I think we will get most of the way there.
Well, just to further on that, the building is not an all-glass building. It's not an office building that is all glazed and very reflective. It has a large proportion of the wall surface as opaque materials to begin with. And that is, in fact, what we're using as our rationale for not etching the glass with patterns in it, which is what bird-friendly design would call for. Again, because we do not want to reduce the resident experience of viewing out. Viewing out is a very important thing for these residents who spend more time in their apartments than maybe a normal resident might, or a less old, less infirm resident might. So that's part of our thinking.
Okay. While we're on architecture, I think some of the renderings you'd shown had, I think it's a D2 garage. That's probably out of scope for the SESP, but do you know if the garage facades are going to have some sort of art or covering? Was that approved in the previous SESP for the overall project?
I mean, it is outside of our purview. We're parking in that, but we're not building it. That is a fairly accurate rendering. There is not, that I'm aware of, any sort of, like art or other screening element for that.
Thought we discussed it for one of the garages, but maybe not this back one.
Yeah, that
Question?
was discussed on the school
School
frontage.
side? Okay. So I'm not sure it's too late for us to put a pin in that one, but it just looked fairly plain. And so that would be a nice thing to do on that D2 garage. Last question, question for staff. So I know that their parking ratios are lower than, or higher than what we actually required at SEE stage. Do we know how this compares to the Kensington parking ratios? And if you don't have the answer now, because I realize it's a project many years old, that's fine. The reason I ask is that I know that we had underparked the staff parking at Kensington, and especially in light of the labor shortage and finding Kensington workers or workers for the Kensington, I know that they've had to often come from quite a distance away. So I wonder if the SRG group will have similar challenges and whether we are appropriately parking for the staff side of things. I think I looked at the ratios for the memory care, assisted living, independent seemed fine, but on the staff front, given that we have learnings actually from another building in town, whether you all have thoughts on that or whether it's managed in the TDM somehow.
We can look more at that for next week. Obviously, this site does have the benefit of being substantially closer to the West Falls Metro, but your point is well taken about making sure that there is sort of sufficient transportation facilities for all the building occupants, the workers, as well as the residents.
Terrific. And if not, let's make sure the TDM takes care of that too.
Mr. Duncan?
Just wonder if we might, by next week, come to us with a comparable from SRG's portfolio if they manage other buildings of this building as regards to parking. It would be helpful to know what the ratios somewhere else are and how they work. The question I had about parking is if I'm an independent living resident, when I come in, where am I putting my car? Am I paying extra to rent a parking space across the bridge deck or in the building? Or what's the business model for parking if I'm assuming that assisted living and obviously memory care are not going to have cars, but the independent living folks, I guess I sort of assume that most will have cars. What's the plan?
We would assume that most independent living residents would have cars, and the cost of parking will most likely be unbundled from the rent they pay for the unit, and they would then pay just on a monthly basis to have a reserved space in the garage.
Okay, that would be the preferable way to go, I think, because we've learned that financial incentives help encourage folks who might have that second car to get rid of the second car if it turns out they've got to pay actual money to rent a space. The other question I had about safety was, what's the access control from the bridge, from the garage through the bridge to the building? Comes in at the second floor? Is that going to be a guarded entrance, or how does that work?
So we don't have that fully designed, but what we'll likely do is have doors at either end. Both doors will have access fobs, and the only people who would have a fob that would work would be either a resident or a staff member, and we would ask all visitors, whether they're relatives or just new prospective tenants or not, to come through the front door and then check in with the concierge. But we would not expect to have a desk at that entry, though that is adjacent to where we have some back of house offices and our sales center. So there will be employees on that floor adjacent to that entry whenever the building is operational.
Okay, well, it's obviously in your best interest to make sure that method, whatever the method turns out to be, works. I mean, I assume there'll be video monitoring too. Just, what we've learned in other buildings is that people slip in sometimes because they look respectable and, they slide in behind somebody who's got a fob, and then all of a sudden they're roaming around floors and people are vulnerable, and obviously we don't want that. And the reverse of that is people somehow slipping out of the building because we had that problem at one of the other buildings in town. And we have to do a police alert to be on the lookout for somebody who's basically gotten out of the building who's not supposed to have gotten out of the building. Affordable housing, that's my other area of inquiry. I think I saw in the papers that we're going to have a cash in lieu of figure. Just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit and let us know if that figure has flexed, given that you're going to have more units now. Is it a per unit number, or is it just some number that emerged from a black box process that you can explain to us?
It was quite some time ago, but it was a a percentage of the density that then kind of equated to a number of units, and we set a value on those units. That value was something that was provided to us when we were asked to come on board by Hoffman to look at the seniors project, and we had set the request for additional density to be based on that value. So I think the answer to your question is it took into consideration a number of different elements, but because it ultimately related back to the amount of density, I think it does take into consideration a change in units. And I would just note while we have added units, we've added very few. So like on a percentage basis, maybe there's 1% more units in the building. So I think any calculation that was done before would still be essentially valid, even if it's not quite, quite like a perfect update to whatever methodology was done.
Okay, let's not try to do math on the fly. I'm certainly not going to try to do it. But if you've got a couple hundred units and you've added 11, I think that's at least that's more than 1% of an increase. At any rate, I'm not trying to get involved in a math fight here.
So
This would be the first chance. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
No,
there.
go ahead.
Just to get the information out there, at the time the amount of the financial payment was established in the SEE voluntary concessions, the sort of pro forma on paper development program was 215 units. That was August of 2021. Today we're at 217. So have we added units from the last time you all saw this at the work session? Yes. But if you're going back to compare the number that was used for that valuation, we're only +2.
So the number is flexed down, flexed up, and
Yes.
you're landed about where you were to begin. It's almost like COVID never happened, isn't it? Don't we wish? Okay. I mean, it's important for, I think, us to have a clear understanding of how we came to that number. I think this is the first time, certainly on a big project, we've taken cash in lieu of units for affordable housing, which is fine. We've talked about doing it. But what you all do will set a precedent for future developers who will come in and say, well, we're going to do what Trammell Crow did because you approved that. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows what we approved or why we approved it, and that we're all satisfied. It works for you economically, and it works for us from a perspective of providing resources for more affordable housing. One last question. If, as I understood earlier, you have to shave 10 feet off the building to make it fit, that doesn't sound like a small challenge at this stage. I mean, sounds like you could do some design magic, but particularly on the first floor, we've already trimmed down the ground floor retail to what you said. That presumably would trim it down even further unless you're not going to take that 10 feet all out of the dining area or whatever. You're not going to completely reconfigure the building. You're basically just going to squeeze it back. So I'm just bringing this up because it'd be nice not to have to go any lower than 7,500 square feet of ground floor retail if we could for a building of this size.
Yeah, it's so, and Gary got into this a little bit. So there's a date certain opening for the grocery store, and we haven't seen all of these documents because we're not party to them. But our understanding is that alley has to be turned over completely, and just the whole thing. So we're trying to work through how to actually build the building, and that's what that flexibility is for. We don't quite know what exactly we would do if we have to make a change, because we need to change the location of the columns, try and slope them back. You would cut away that facade, probably have to expose some of the back of the building. And then to your comment, the biggest challenge is how the loading dock fits in, because you're not going to have the depth, so we're going to angle all the docks, and then we have challenges on the first floor. So we would need to take, I think, a big chunk out of the retail. We obviously have the minimums, which we would work to continue to meet, but it's not something we want to do. But we don't have a plan of how to actually deal with it. We just know that if we have to keep that alley open, we have to have the space to build. So we will be continuing to work on that. But yeah, that's a kind of
All right, well, that's a reasonably grim assessment of what my face is, so let's just make sure staff stays with the macro number on commercial that you referred to earlier there. If we're losing it in this building, we need to make sure that it's made up elsewhere to meet the standards that we asked for. Okay, thanks. Thanks for all your work on this. Appreciate staff's work. And it's going to be a great building, I think, when we get it built. It's going to really be a landmark for the city in the entire metropolitan area. So thank you very much.
All right. Anything from you?
Yeah, all of my questions have been asked by my. I just wanted to give a comment that I appreciate you making the 20% energy reduction and moving to electric. I know there are a lot of people have been working behind the scenes from Environmental Sustainability Council and hitting those targets, and they are going to make a difference. So appreciate you incorporating them and those of so many others in our boards and commissions. Thank you.
All right. Well, I've got a few questions and comments for you. One, as relates to bike parking, I would ask you all to pull some of that out of the bowels of your building. It looks like most, or at least a pretty good percentage of your bike parking is in the basement, and it looked like maybe only 6 on the surface. I would ask if you could try to pull some of your parking from the bottom of your building, the bottom of your garage, up to surface, and just sort of raise it up, and so it's not as far down in the building. I can't remember the chart, but that's my recollection of the chart. But I'd ask you to try to get your bike parking up so it's visible and usable and accessible, and not so 70-year-old person has to go 2 levels down to find their bike someplace. Do you know who the brand operator is? Is it RGS, or is it actually like a name we may have heard of?
It's a group called, I guess 2 things. On the bike parking, our average age is probably like 85 in the building, so we will absolutely try and accommodate that, but we think most of the bikes would be used by staff, which is part of why we thought this was a good place to concentrate the parking. We will definitely try and make that change. And then the operator is a group, a senior resource group. They're based out of San Diego, national senior living operator, and we are developing a project in Alexandria called 765 John Carlisle Street with them. They'll be operating that as well. It's a very similar building to this, high rise, 17 stories. We'll tolerate up to 210 feet, and a very similar unit count, just over 200. And then they run a great precedent project down in Buckhead that we had looked at. That's also high-rise construction in an urban environment like this. But we've been very pleased to be able to work with them, and that's who they are, and we can share information if you'd like.
Got it. Okay. Also, the transformer, is that below grade you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay, so it is, you're talking about moving it or whatever, but whatever it is below grade and will stay below grade? Okay, good, great. I heard something about EFS somewhere, and I saw that in the staff report. What do you guys do? I'm not a big fan of cementitious board anyway, and then taking it a notch down. Where is that going to be at?
It's only located on the mechanical screening wall. Gary, if you want to talk a little bit about that, I know you delved into it deeply.
Well, it is only at the very, very top of the building on a floor where no people will have access. So it'll be difficult to see, certainly impossible to touch. So it should have minimal impact.
So is it visible from, where is it visible from?
Well, if we go to the renderings, Mr. Scott. So a page or two. Yeah, there we go. So the very light colored material at the very top of the building is what we're talking about.
Got it. I guess I would just encourage you to use maybe what I would consider higher quality material. I understand it's not highly visible because it's the top of a building. You got bulk plane angles and things like that where it's not super visible, but nonetheless, I'll just give you my 2 cents, which would be if you can upgrade it, I would recommend it. Let me go on to 1 or 2 other ones real quick. The garage, I guess, again, out of your hands, looks like it's just precast concrete. We had talked during this process about having like living wall, green walls and things like that. Did none of that really come to fruition Mr. Shields?
It did not. And so on the Mustang or the high school side, there is still discussion of art and things like that that are related to the school. But green wall for the garage it was not part of the site plan.
Okay. Also, with respect to the TDM, are we doing anything with fare cards? I mean, this is like right next to Metro, real close to Metro. Any part of the TDM, any fare cards for either employees, residents, and the like? Are we doing any of that, Mr. Shields? Or I guess the applicant?
We're checking right now, but we are almost positive that we are.
Okay. I would encourage you to start, and I would encourage the city to start doing more of that, because I tell you that just priming people to get on the Metro, I think will encourage them to actually use it. And this location is about as good as it gets in the city. So I would encourage you, to the extent you aren't doing that, both for residents, employees, the whole 9 yards, get them on Metro and keep them on Metro, and I think we'll all be the better for it. Let me see if I've got anything else for you. Retail, I hear you on the retail. I'd love for you to get that number up if you can. So just keep that in mind for whatever it's worth. Retail is important to us in this city, both for financial, but I think even more importantly, just quality of life and creating a sense of place. And that was a big part of this development. So anyway, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've got. I think that's all I've got. Is there anyone else have any final words? If not, thank you for coming out again tonight and for your very detailed presentation. And we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you all. Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to our next item, which is Ms. Bawa. I'm giving you the drum roll here. Year-end budget. Thank you all. Year-end budget, financial report.
So as Ms. Bawa is making her way to the spotlight, I'll just make a few comments by way of introduction. One, we did have a Budget and Finance Committee meeting on Friday where we reviewed an abbreviated version of the material that Ms. Bawa will walk us through tonight. And for the public's information, those who are tuning into this discussion, I would just note that our year-end review is something that we traditionally do in October. And so what we're looking at are the results of operations for the fiscal year that ended last June 30th. So in one sense, it's a backwards look. And we need that additional time because of state disbursements. We're right now in the process of the audit. The City Council gets the formal audit in December. And so the numbers that we'll review tonight are not audited. But they're not going to change significantly. This also, though, is our chance to look forward as well. This is kind of our best data set right now in terms of the state of the city economy and the state of the city's finances. And that sets the stage for FY24 budget development. On December 5th is when we're scheduled to have a joint session with the school board to look at those in more detail and really start to get into our initial projections for the development of next year's budget. And then lastly, this is relevant for the immediate as well. As Ms. Bawa will review, we do have revenues that came in above our budget projections, and we also had underspending from last year's budget. And so taken together, there will then be a discussion about some strategic purposes that those dollars could be put towards in the current fiscal year. Our intent would be to come back to you on November 7th to have a work session discussion about a budget amendment for the current fiscal year, deploying some of these FY22 year-end dollars. So with that introduction, Ms. Bawa, let me turn it over to you.
Good evening, Mayor Tarter and members of the council. We have for you fiscal year 2022 year-end financial report. We'll take a deeper look into the revenues, collections, and the expenditures. Year-end fund balance, the impact of the revenues and expenditures on that, and then comparison with the fiscal year 2023 projections, how we are placed with that. That will end the year-end report. We'll take a look at providing you an update on the Arpa expenditures, and then followed by next steps that are in the pipeline. So slide number 3 shows an overall summary of how we ended the last fiscal year. The top section shows the revenue, total revenue summary that came in above budget by 3.25 million, which is 3.6% above the budget. I want to reiterate the fact that the revenue estimates for fiscal year 2022 were set low due to the fact that we were still recovering from the uncertainties related to COVID, and just like similar to most jurisdictions, the revenue estimates were conservative back in April of last year. The expenditures shown in the second half.
Karen, can I just pause for a second?
Sure.
Are people able to see the numbers very clearly? Maybe, are we able to zoom in just a
Are
little
there
bit?
any paper copies over there?
Oh, yes.
I thought that we had some, so that would be most
I
helpful.
left mine at home.
I think those are in big font.
You have large print edition?
Right.
Some of us? Is it online? It's not on the agenda. The agenda is the staff report.
No, what was
It will be online after the meeting.
what was posted online was the memo. A lot of these numbers are in that memo. This presentation has not yet been posted.
Thank you for stopping me there. Lots of numbers on that slide. So the revenues came in over budget by 3.6%, 3.25 million. And the expenditures showed an underspending of 805,000, which is almost 1% of the budget target that we had set, primarily due to savings realized from vacancies and staff turnover. So together, the revenues over budget and underspending, it resulted in a total year-end balance of $4,056,000. The next slide provides a breakdown of the general fund revenue collections. By the end of 2022, most of these revenue categories have recovered to pre-COVID levels. Absent interfund transfers, proceeds from bonds and federal grants, fiscal year 2022 operating revenues are showing a growth of over 9% over fiscal year 2021, which is 2.47 million. To call out the highlights, meals tax, business license have shown very strong recovery. Hotel tax and charges for services like recreation and athletic programs have shown progress. However, they're still not at their pre-pandemic level. Sales tax, on the other hand, that saw a surge during the COVID years due to increased online sales, is in 2022 has shown a below average growth of 3.5% over the budget. And we'll take a closer look at each of these local categories. So that was just a summary. So moving on to slide number 5. The next few slides provide a look at the 5 local tax economic indicators. The blue line over there shows the budget that we set in the beginning of the year, and the red line shows the actual revenue collections. And we have a summary of over 10 years for each of these. So if the actual collections are below budget, it indicates a deficit. And if the actuals exceed the budget, it reflects a surplus. So with that common ground on all of these, the personal property tax collections have been pretty constant since 2018. If you see that red line, it's been pretty constant. We did not see a growth due to depreciation of business tangibles in some of the years, and then came COVID. However, in 2022, I want to point out both the budget and the actuals are very, very close in 2022. And in 2023, an increase of 5.4% is needed to meet our 23 budget target, which we expect to exceed. As we all know, the assessed value of vehicles have come in higher than anticipated due to the supply chain issues in the past few months. Moving along to sales tax. So looking at actuals versus budget on this one, clearly sales tax experienced a surge during the pandemic years 2020, 21, and those 2 years due to increased online sales. In 2022, the sales tax ended 1.7% below budget, and this includes a correction from Fairfax County of $310,000 that was not previously accounted for. So without this correction, we would have exceeded budget by 3.5%. However, taking this correction into account, we will need 11% increase over current year actual to achieve the 23 budget projections. So that is a category we need to monitor closely. And in addition, as we get into the next year, we need to also monitor the possible uncertainty over how the Virginia General Assembly will handle the grocery tax as it gets into next session.
Hey, Karen.
Yes.
While we're on sales tax, during budget and finance, we asked whether we had more data on the breakdown within sales tax, whether it's online and grocery have kind of reverted to pre-COVID levels, or if there's some other driver why sales lagged kind of our somewhat conservative projections.
Right. So we got the data, and it's the grocery that's kind of tapered. We saw a decrease in grocery tax even in 21 slightly, but that was even reduced in 22. Online sales are still seeing a growth. And then overall sales that we get for the Falls Church area, we get a 6 month by 6 month, and that since January of 21, it was pretty good till June, and then it saw a little drop for the next 6 months, and then for the last 6 months of the fiscal year, we saw a drop. So overall sales also a little low on that.
I think an interesting data point would be whether the region's seeing something similar in sales or whether there's something unique going on in Falls Church. So if spending habits are slowing down because of obviously inflation and other factors, or if there's something unique about what's happening here.
Right, and that's definitely something we're going to hone into for when we bring you the projections, preliminary projections for next year. Sure. The next one, slide 7, is the meals tax, which was going steady till 2019, if you see that red line, and then saw a big drop in 20 and 21 due to COVID impact, and then in 2022, the meals tax showed a strong recovery, the red line, which is seeing 34% above budget and a 29% over 2021. Which is actually 14% over 2019, and that's a full fiscal year pre-pandemic. So just to put into perspective, that has recovered above the pre-pandemic levels. And so in order to meet next year's projection, meals tax collection requires a 5.5% growth, which is in line with the 5-year and shorter term averages also there. So we expect to meet that projection next year in 23. The next one is business license tax projections, which were reduced. The budget was reduced in 21 to account for impact on businesses during COVID. However, business license tax BPOL continues to grow across all industries, including contracting, professional services, specialized occupations, and rental properties. In fiscal year 22, BPOL collections are already higher than the 23 projections. So this is one thing we hope to meet, keeping the current trend. We hope to exceed the budget for next year, fiscal year. The next one on slide 9 is other taxes. These include hotel tax, cigarette tax, consumer utility tax, bank taxes, recordation tax, and communication taxes. Hotel tax is recovering with collections exceeding budget in 22. However, yet at the end, even during the last quarter of 22, which is the summer months, receipts are still around 60% of pre-pandemic levels. So that's another one we still need to realize some more gain there. And there were gains also in recordation taxes, possibly the West Falls Church deal there. And then utility and cigarette taxes also saw increases over budget. And other taxes collected in 2022 are already higher than the budget target for 23. So all these individually looked at local tax indicators on page 10, on slide 10, show collectively that we need to realize an increase of 4.4% over fiscal year 2022 actuals in order to meet the 2023 budget projection. So which is for the most part in line with the trend of the current local market indicators.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Did I mishear in saying that for the sales tax, with the 300K positive correction, we're now at 11%?
Yeah, so
23 over 22, I'm seeing 16 point. Did I hear you incorrectly?
So
can you hear me?
So with the correction included in the the 310,000 paid, we would need to realize a 16.9%. But if we factor out the adjustment that was, because it was a correction for past years, if we take that out, we still need to come up with 11% growth to meet the 23 budget target that we set.
So I guess the confusion is, where are we definitively on the correction? Do we need it or not?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Do we need, can you clarify, do we need a 300K correction or not?
Oh, the correction is definitely needed is made in 2022. It's a correction that we had to pay back. It came in higher. We made a total correction of $1 million. And
okay.
Of the amount that was, it's smoothed over 3 years. They can only ask for corrections of up to 3 years for misallocations across counties. So there was a correction, additional amount needed of 310 that was not accounted for, that we had to make.
Okay.
So that's not expected next year. So if we take that correction out, we still need to come up with 11% growth.
So one more question about the correction. So if I'm understanding correctly, the state realized that we had gained sales tax from actually Falls Church, Fairfax County, and not the city. And so were our sales tax projections in the past several years essentially higher than they should have been because we were basing it off of that?
Yeah, so in 23 when we set, we were aware of that and we accounted for that. But this 310 came as an added to whatever the amount that was, 700 plus 784 was the amount for the other 2 years.
Does this happen fairly regularly? That's something that we should think about for sales tax and not be as bullish?
Yeah, so our auditors in the Commissioner of Revenue are now actually actively monitoring this, and we are looking into it even before we are approached by Fairfax on this, and we try to set aside the money. And that's how they smoothed it over 3 years, because we were aware of it ahead of time. And
got it, but they can only claim 3 years worth of corrections. Right. Got it.
Does it ever happen? Money?
They do look for that, but mostly it's the other way around, because people think it's Falls Church address, so it goes to Falls Church. Okay, now moving over to, we'll switch to the general fund expenditures. Chart number 11 shows general fund year-end spending for more than 15 years. The brown portion at the bottom is expenditures for general government. The green portion is for the school operations, and the purple on the top is the city's debt service for capital projects. So you'll see a noticeable drop in 2010, 11, and 12 fiscal years, and that was the last major economic downturn, with recovery starting in 2013 fiscal year. Zooming into the general fund government operations, this chart shows, chart number 12 shows expenditures over 10 years. The top green portion is for interjurisdictional contracts with Arlington, Fairfax, and the purple portion, the last 5-6 years, is for the subsidy, the WMATA subsidy that we pay for operations. And the red portion in the bottom is the remaining general government discretionary expenditures. So for the most part, the contracts and WMATA has stayed stable, and it's the general government portion at the bottom, which we kind of have discretion over. And you'll see that in 2022, we saw an increase after about 16 years of staying steady. Staying steady since 2016, sorry. And the blue line, which is a portion, reflects the personnel costs, shows an increase in 2022 for the first time since 7 years or so, starting in 2016, after remaining flat for that time. And then zooming more into that blue line in the next chart, which is the personnel expenditures, shows a breakdown of the personnel costs. And you'll see it more clearly here that since 2016, the overall personnel costs, the bars have stayed steady. And between 2022 and 23, there is roughly an increase of $5 million in personnel costs, which is approximately 20% growth in 2 years since 2016. So that is a noticeable change here. On that one, I wanted to mention that the personnel costs are about 55% of total expenditure budget. However, it's about 72% of general fund discretionary budget. So, leaving aside the contracts and the WMATA.
That percentage including the other benefits, health and OPEB and retirement? Or just
Right. We look at personnel costs as a whole.
the fully loaded
Yeah,
cost?
fully loaded, yeah.
What was that percentage? Fully
It's about 56% of total expenditures and 71% of the discretionary expenditures after factoring out the contracts and the WMATA subsidy, which we have to pay, so.
And what, do you have a chart that shows the number of personnel? I know for a long time, our personnel numbers were flat.
Yeah, so I do want to mention that in 23, we added 15 FTEs. Now we're up to 224.6 positions in 2023. We were at 209 in 2022.
Karen, sorry, Ms. Boa, page 11, am I reading this right? For 2022 results of operations, general government is what is that, 39,000, and schools is 42,000?
Which slide are we on?
11. When you sum up the red with the green, which is the schools is
Yeah, so our
$1 million more, or whatever. It's larger than the general government.
their transfer amount is over 40. I'd have to look up the exact amount, but
So that's just.
and we have realized savings. We've come in under budget on our expenditures for, I think, the last 3 or 4 years that I can remember. Each year we have come in under budget, so yeah.
So our results of operations ends up being less because we're under budget on the red bar.
Yes.
Yeah.
Also, the transfer we
More employees in the school.
also, they may have realized underspending, but that goes into their fund balance, which we consider as a transfer that's made. So that's why their transfer amount is constant, kind of. So we will show as a part of our fund balance what we underspent, but when we make a transfer, it's gone. They may not have expended the whole amount, and we know that in the COVID years, they realized underspending. So. Okay, so moving to slide 14. The These are updated to show the 3, 5, and 10-year averages for school transfers, seat enrollment, general government expenditures, and then the organic revenue growth. So the recent strong growth has helped improve the 3-year average, which was previously quite depressed and negative in many cases, like this chart from last year, and including the impact from double-digit increases in the AB in 2023, it can be interpreted that economy is giving us an average of 3.5% growth on an average, 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, if you look at that revenue growth line, the organic. So moving along to unassigned general fund balance. This is a 15-year picture. The green and the red lines show the floor and the goal, the target of the current fund balance policy thresholds that we have. The green line target threshold is 12%. The red one is 17%. At the end of fiscal year 22, the unassigned fund balance is 21.4 million, which is 20%, which is about the policy target of 17%. So if you look at that 2022 bar, the second one from the right, there is a portion on top that shows the 770,000 that'll be required to maintain the fund balance policy at 17% of expenditures for 23. And then the remaining 3.2 that's shown in blue stripes on top is excess over the policy limit. So that is comprised of the total 4,056,000. That
Karen, you might know the question I'm about to ask.
Yeah.
Because our debt to expenditure ratio is high right now, aren't we in the new part of the policy where we need to be at 20% total reserves and not the 12 to 17% unassigned fund balance policy?
So it's 20% of current available balance, which also includes the capital reserves.
Yeah.
However, we want to make sure that in any given year, we also retain the unassigned fund balance, because we will switch back to the unassigned fund balance policy. It'll put a strain on us maybe after 3 years when we go back. The debt service to expenditure will recover in 2 years. However, the payback ratio will not recover till almost 2026.
So how does that total reserves picture look?
So that is going to be provided as part of CIP, but that is over our 20% target. We're closer to the 30% limit on that one.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so the policy says that if our debt service to expenditure exceeds 12% and no more than 15, and also if the payback ratio of the debt is 25% in 5 years and 50% in 10 years, if those ratios are not coming back in those format, then we need to have meet the current available fund balance policy, which is 20%. Of total expenditures, and that would include unassigned fund balance and the capital reserves, and also the permit reserves in that bucket. And the debt service to expenditures is expected, when we did the modeling for the full CIP, is expected to come back within the 12% threshold by 2023. But the payback ratio is not expected to come back to its required policy threshold till 2026. Sure. Okay.
This is before, it was before you were on council, but we altered that policy, the financial policy, so that we were able to do all the construction at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that conversation goes right into the capital reserve projections. Next slide, page 16. So this chart shows the recent summary and projections for the next few years. If we see line, the fifth one, fiscal year 2022, we ended the year with 12.9 million in capital reserves. And in 2023, the uses are mostly offset by the additions that are coming, the payment from the ground lease payment, and with a projected ending balance of 12.6 million next fiscal year in 23. So looking at the starting point, we started with $4,056,000 as the year-end balance. After accounting for the general fund, 17% unassigned fund balance policy requirement, setting aside $770,000 for that one. And then the school's share of the local tax revenue portion, based on the recent understanding and informal agreement that we have had with them on the sharing of the one-time and ongoing revenues. Their portion is $1.16 million. That leaves an available balance of $2,121,000. At this point, I would like to mention that in fiscal year 2022, we see that the economic recovery to pre-pandemic levels for most revenue categories. However, we need to be exercising caution amidst signals of evolving global economic crisis, which is being talked about with rising inflation, rising interest rates, supply chain disruptions due to the Russia-Ukraine war. We're seeing strong indications that economic slowdown is in the pipeline. So I think that is something we need to be mindful of. Even though we have this one-time money, the next year projections are going to be impacted by all the economic factors that we're seeing globally. So the next slide shows that the year-end funds can be used to address one-time needs and initiatives such as funding the CIP projects in lieu of the debt that we had in the adopted CIP, for improvements to core transportation infrastructure, as was discussed at the last work session with the DPW director, Mr. Bradley. A portion of it could be used to fund council work plan initiatives, such as the 75th anniversary and others in the work plan. A portion of it could also be used to mitigate the effect of inflation on employees and various contracts across multiple departments. There is a replacement of equipment that is required, which is past its useful life, and they're eligible use of this one-time money. Funds could be set aside for professional development for employees, and a portion of these funds could also be set aside to address 2024 budget needs on factors and certain uncertainties that that'll open up or evolve as we move into the next year's budget. So any use of prior year funds require an appropriation request by staff and an ordinance approved by council. So staff plans to bring forward a budget amendment for discussion at the November 7th work session. And that is the end of year end. But then now we'll move into the ARPA update. Maybe we can do questions after everything, or you want to do after everything? Okay. So the city was allocated a total of $18 million for ARPA funding through two pots of funding, and a total of $15.7 million has been appropriated to date, which includes $12 million in 2022 and $3.75 million in 2023. A total of $2.7 million has been spent as of June 30th, 2022. The city has until December of 24 to encumber these funds, and December of 26 to expend the funds.
Can we pause here, just make sure I got the numbers right? So 15.7 was appropriated.
Mm-hmm.
We planned to spend 12 in FY22. That fiscal year ended, we actually only spent 2.7.
Mm-hmm.
So we're rolling over 9 million. And then we're planning to spend 3.7 in FY23 that is now underway, plus whatever was planned in FY22. I think in budget and finance, what would be helpful is a view of how much total we got, the 18 million, how much is appropriated, how much is encumbered, and how much is actually spent. Because that is easier to keep track of in my head
Right.
than deadlines for those two.
Right.
Thank you.
However, yes, we have over 2 years to encumber the funds till December of '24, and a big chunk of it is for the stormwater projects. So the next slide shows. Estimate of, sorry. There was some encumbrance on the contract that was awarded for the Trammell branch, and that I think is and some spending on operations positions. I don't have exact amount, but not a whole lot more is encumbered. Like we have the CIP funding that has been set aside that'll carry forward, but reprogramming of any money that was not spent is required. So if we had funding for public health safety that we didn't spend, we're going to come back and request for carry forward of those funds as part of the next budget.
So the story is we just have some work to do to encumber the money that we've appropriated. Okay.
The chart you have in your memo has it more clearly.
Yeah, so there is a table in the in the staff report that gives a breakdown by project, the funding that was assigned and how much was spent to date. So at a high level, 1 million has been expended for purchase of Virginia Village property, 500,000 for the new HVAC system at Mary Ellen Henderson Middle School, 650,000 towards premium pay for essential school and general government employees during the pandemic, 337,000 in business assistance grants, and 100,000 for mental health professional at the school, and over 90,000 for public health and safety needs for the general government. There is an appropriation of 7.6 million for stormwater improvements, which are still in design phase, and contract for Trammell branch, like I said, was awarded earlier this month. However, the actual spending on that one is 46,000 on the design to date. So also similarly to appropriation of year-end funds, any request to reprogram some of this Arpa money, unspent funds, would be brought forward as part of the upcoming budget amendment, which we plan to bring to council on November 7th work session, and then 2 hearings following that. We also plan to bring the first quarter results for this fiscal year to the Budget and Finance Committee on November 18th. And then the preliminary revenue projections as we prepare for next year's budget would be presented at the joint school board and city council meeting on December 5th, followed by council's budget guidance a week later on December 12th. So that concludes my report.
All right. Let's keep in mind, too, that we're not going to probably get to the bottom of this tonight. In other words, let's get into it, but we got plenty of work and some time to get through it. So thank you for the fine work you've done, and a lot to absorb here today. Mr. Snyder, you want to start off?
Sure. At I think our last meeting, the city manager proposed a new sort of staff for immediate transportation projects. Do you have any kind of an estimate as to what that will be? What are we facing next year?
So staffing for the transportation project specifically.
Right.
Right. So in Mr. Bradley's memo to council, there was an estimate or a projection of $700,000 to do that staffing up, plus the materials that they would need in order to respond more quickly to resident requests. And his memo also detailed core infrastructure investments, and those totaled 2.5 million. So those are both very big numbers that we're wrestling with. And so we don't have the solution for you tonight. Those are the numbers that have been proposed by our subject matter experts, and we'll need to work maybe to refine that proposal a little bit, see what can be done in the short term and what we'll need to think about in terms of a more sustained effort.
Seems to me both of those numbers are very relevant to our consideration of these numbers tonight, which is why I wanted them on the record. The other question, and this isn't necessarily for tonight, but I'm trying to project forward, and I recall all the caveats that our CFO mentioned, and maybe put those in writing, some of the global as well as U.S. trends that are of potential concern. So we know interest rates have risen. We know that they've risen, that they'll probably rise higher, and that has a negative effect on the housing market. So I'm trying to figure out, what is the real estate tax rate? What is the appreciation increase we would need to cover likely next year's budget at the current tax rate? And that will help inform us as to how careful we need to be with the surpluses we're having this year. I think I got that right. Anyway, close to it. But to me, that's a fundamental question. If we keep our current tax rate and project these sort of, increases in employee compensation and other things like that, what would the appreciation have to be? And then we have to look at that because, in fact, the trends are toward lower appreciations generally. Now, they may not be here, but are generally lower rather than higher. So I'm trying to get a sense about, what are we facing next year and how careful, well, we obviously are always careful, but how really, really careful we're going to have to be for the use of this money so that, as opposed to pushing it out the door on various things, all important, should we maintain this money, not spend it, and use it to cushion what may be a negative trend potentially even starting now, depending on what the numbers are for this quarter, but certainly as the sort of negative trends that are being projected.
So it's a tough question to answer because it is a bit ahead of us. The assessors of real estate will be meeting over the course of this month to just share notes in terms of what they're seeing on market sales. They're required by the Virginia Constitution to assess at 100% fair market value based on what sales are happening. So by December 5th, we'll, I think, have a read as to what's happening regionally. And really, our own AV really doesn't get finalized until February. We think caution is appropriate. And so it's a really difficult message internally and externally. We have this feeling of abundance with this report. Much of that abundance really, though, is coming back from the economy springing back essentially to where it was in 2019. And we did cut our budget really significantly to adjust for COVID. Now we're springing back, and that healthy spring back is the surpluses that you see. But still, even with that spring back, we're looking at, since 2019, about 2% annual growth in revenues. So that's 3 years where we've been averaging 2% growth. Our 10-year average is like 3.5% of organic revenue growth. Even those two might be optimistic given the interest rate environment and the discussions of recession that are on the horizon. So I think we're going to have some really tough discussions this coming budget, and it'll be even tougher right now because I think we're going to feel a little whiplash after feeling really good about this financial report, and then have to sort of pivot to possibly some difficult times ahead.
And then the second area is the revenue intake with the expenses going out. The inflation rate is very high for some of the things we do, right? Construction costs and other things like that. So it's like revenues are potentially going to go down, inflation is pushing the costs up.
Yes, Ms. Hiscott?
Wyatt, could you please remind us when we'll have the information on the salary review? Because that's obviously a big expense that we've been discussing for the past couple of years.
So we do have now a firm date on delivering their initial recommendations, and that is, or I shouldn't say recommendations, additional, their initial sort of data dump in terms of our compensation relative to market. So that compensation study is intended to do two things. One, assess our compensation relative to our peers in our marketplace, and then two, check for internal equity within our organization. That's the purpose of that study. So we'll have data this week. HR then will work that data just to understand it. And their review mostly is going to be on the internal equity side in terms of kind of what their black box produces for us in order to hit market, sort of that external equity piece. So I would think that's probably going to take probably 2 weeks for that internal review by our Human Resources Department. And then we'll have data after that.
Thank you. No, that's a big driver for us as well.
Ms. Hardy?
Thank you. I thought Dave Snyder's comments were really prudent and smart about thinking ahead to FY24, because I don't think we're going to be prepared to go on a spending spree with that kind of on the horizon. That said, though, out of all the things on the use of year-end funds, hearing kind of where the community's needs are, I do think that being responsive to the transportation and bike infrastructure is really important. So I think getting numbers on that quick build team, some of the low-hanging fruit for bike infrastructure, I think would be high up on my list. I know we talked about holiday lights last time, Wyatt, so I assume that's already part of the budget amendment. And if they need to be expanded to Haycock, I would certainly support that. It lends me to think about kind of the Arpa, though. With, I guess, only 2-point-some million spent on Arpa. Karen, when you come back with the budget amendment and the reprogramming, are we essentially reprogramming, like, what's the ballpark? How much are we reprogramming?
The reprogramming is going to be, I want to say, 200,000 to 400,000. I don't have an exact number because we're still looking at our priorities. But there were some things that we appropriated for that we no longer need the funding for. We spent some and we don't need any more. So that's going to be back on the table, and we're going to have some more discussion on what we could do that on, and then understand what's the impact of some of the things we have added, like we've added some communication staff and some other procurement staff. So we have to make sure we pay for those till end of 2025 fiscal year. So what funding we need to set aside.
Yep. And so we still have 2.5 million out of 18 that's not been appropriated. So I don't want to reopen kind of the 15 million, but I know that we clearly have a bunch of one-time funds between ARPA and this surplus. The ARPA ones are more restrictive. I wonder if it makes sense for us to be strategic and think about between the two buckets of money. ARPA is going to be more restrictive. Are there things we should rethink about using ARPA for, because the rules are stricter for that, although it comes with more strings attached? And then the surplus that we're talking about now has more flexible. But I think it's just worth us thinking through that rather than assume that that 15.7 million is all appropriated and spoken for. Clearly only stormwater and affordable housing really are spent. Everything else has been pretty negligible. So we really realistically have a fair amount of money in the ARPA side to think about too.
Right.
So.
And I definitely think that we need to reconsider the ARPA spend based on updated guidance on ARPA funds that was issued, just recently. Went to a VML conference, and they outlined flexibilities, say, for example, for affordable housing, and what you can do with it. So I think we want to educate, make sure we're all on the same page on the new guidance before we take a fresh look at what we need to reappropriate that we didn't spend under the budgeted column on this Word memo. And then in addition to kind of just clarifying how much we gotta encumber, right, to make sure we're spending by 24. For some reason, I'm a little worried that we're not gonna encumber it by 24, because that's happened before in government and money has been lost. So I want to make sure we do that.
It's right that we should be planning for it right now, so it's not a rush in the last 6 months or the last 3 months.
Like, for example, one of the things that I guess maybe ARPA could be ARPA eligible would be some of the transportation things, right? So the speed limit reduction qualified. And so are there other transportation safety things that we might consider funding with one-time end of year surplus, but instead should be ARPA? And that might be a more strategic way to go about it than using the
Also-
local dollars.
There's also some environmental uses, the HVAC of the community center. I know there's like roughly $1 million, and we're doing that with ARPA. But if we spend 1.3, the actual system employed could be more environmentally friendly, effective, longer term, et cetera. So there's like maybe doubling down on some of the use of ARPA funds to make sure it's the most effective use and meet some of our environmental goals. Because we know we set aside the energy plan. The energy plan is going to take up the bulk of this year, and we won't probably see a whole lot of financial requests until FY24. And at one point in time, there will be, potentially a lot of financial requests to meet the goals that we have hired these contractors to help us outline really specifically. I don't think we'll have any of them for this fiscal year. So
I
I
guess
just
quick
wanted to throw
summary.
that for ARPA dollars, to also
yeah.
be considering that, just
so-
tagging on to what you're already saying.
Yep, so the quick summary is, I guess, if for the stuff that's not really spoken for in ARPA, I guess I'd like to relook at, are there things that we should use ARPA for, given that we haven't spent that much of it?
Yeah, we had a spending plan that we got to council December, January of last year. And so we're going to refine that based on what the needs are now and some of the spending that we need to reprogram. So we'll bring that as part of the budget amendment.
Great. Last question. What are the interest rates now if we were to debt finance anything?
Oh God, I haven't looked
You know.
into it, but I'm thinking it's got to be.
And how much debt are we planning to issue in FY23 or 24? Zero.
Yeah, I know. 23 is $1 million.
I feel like we remember that in the budget, 'cause I asked
Yeah,
during
it
the
was
budget
including
process.
sewer and sanitary. It's $1 million.
Their utility funds.
And general fund alone is about 800,000. I want to say 700 to 800,000 because we have some from 22 that we didn't fund. So, and we didn't need due to the timing of the project. So we'll bring a detailed on that one as well.
Thank you.
Good amendment.
Phil? At this stage, we usually, are trying to round up the boogeymen, so it's good that we talked about inflation's impact on salaries. I think that's important in the short term. Mr. Snyder's raised some other concerns. I wonder, do we have any uglies coming at us from health insurance costs or sometimes personnel things like that? Do we have any readings on health insurance expenses?
No indications as of yet. February is the time when we get them. We do put a placeholder of a 10% average increase when we come to you in December, but normally we get it in February. We have seen an increase in Kaiser last year, and we've seen and holding the PPO flat, the TLC, and then we have seen the other way around the year before. So it has been within 10% the last 2-3 years, actually. So that placeholder has worked. However, it's hard to say what it'll be. I mean, inflation is going to kick in there as well. So
No, we don't know anything except just what we usually
no indications.
budget for.
no.
Okay, no real scary that we know of out there. What about Metro? What are our obligations to Metro? And do we have resources from?
They've been pretty stable, but, we're all reading, Metro long-term, and that'll be something we'll need to discuss as a city as to what our position is on that. But they've got a revenue problem with the reduction in fare revenue that's no longer being replaced by the federal subsidy. So that discussion is ongoing as to what we as a city are willing to do and what the larger community is willing to do in terms of Metro going forward.
I've just been reading the headlines. Again,
Yeah.
nothing shockingly scary yet, but just keep our eyes open.
Yeah, absolutely. And right now, my go-in position is we have a 3% cap on Metro operating increases, right, Cindy? And I'm going to say we stick with that if we have to get up that high. But, I mean, there's going to be a very difficult conversation as to what service levels, what fares will be, and how this built-in budget gap that's only going to get worse in future years is going to be met, either through reduction in costs or, a new tax in the region, for example, increased subsidies. And we know, of course, in Northern Virginia, thanks to the state, we pay, as is indicated in our budget, a chunk of metro costs that aren't paid by localities in Maryland. So it's very, very difficult, but it'll be a subject of further conversation, I'm sure.
Thank you. Just one other thought. What you said about growth in the since 2019. I'm just looking at the chart on page 14, the prior year averages chart. So the revenue growth, the organic revenue growth number is remarkably consistent over 3, 5, and 10 years. It's about 3.5%. Does that 3-year number capture what you said about growth being down as a result of COVID?
Yeah, that 3-year look, you could almost picture it as it's a bridge over a gorge, because we had negative 5% and flat, and then we have the spring back now. So it averages out to 3.5%, but there's some big decrease.
Tumult in behind those numbers. Well, that's useful to know. I mean, at this stage of things, I'm always trying to figure out what the big picture is. And, one thing that this council has always done, the ones that I've served on, is, we pursue growth aggressively. We budget conservatively, prudently, but conservatively. And we keep taxpayers in mind. So I would ask us to take into consideration all these numbers and all the factors. One piece of good news is school enrollment seems pretty stable. There have been some past years when we were looking at some of these unknowns, and on top of that, school enrollment was up 8% or whatever, which introduced obvious costs that we probably won't have to bear now. So I guess I would, call attention to the number at the bottom line, the 2.1 million, even after fund balancing up to 17% and sharing $1 million plus with the schools. We still have net available 4 cents or so on the tax rate in that $2.1 million figure, which is testimony to our good work to promote growth and generate revenues and budget conservatively. But at this stage and at every stage, I hope we'll keep the folks in mind who are paying the taxes. And I know that we all do that, and let's just keep that in our sights also. Thanks.
All right. So I'll just give a few comments, and then maybe we can wrap up this conversation. So one, let me ask you about stormwater. It seems like it's going slower than we had envisioned. Is that accurate in terms of where we are in engineering and spending money and things like that?
So we did just release the contract for the Trammell Branch project, so that's an important project, and that's good news. We are in final engineering for one of the 2 Hillwood projects and for the Sharrow Ave project. So I think we'll see those coming along pretty shortly to get those out to bid. So that's 3 of the big 6, and the other 3 are a little bit of a longer lead time, with the biggest one being the Harrison Branch, which is still in preliminary engineering. That one's a step or 2 behind. The other 2 are smaller projects. There's a second one on Hillwood, and there's one on Lincoln that I think will follow along pretty quickly behind. That's sort of the order.
Got it. I mean, I definitely encourage you all to keep that moving. I mean, things seem to have a habit of just kind of slowing down, and I think for the folks who are in that area, it couldn't come any too soon.
Right.
So I would also, I think it's a great opportunity to try to upgrade our bike infrastructure as well, and so maybe some thoughts, not just low-hanging fruit, but things we might be able to do as relates to bike infrastructure, which I think we haven't really focused on as much as maybe we should have in the past. But I think that would be good to hear some thoughts from you all as well as how that might work. And then, Kieran, you mentioned 4.4% at some point. Can you explain that just a bit more?
Yeah, so if we continue the trend of the revenues that we have collected in 2022, we need to grow at a rate of 4.4% over that to meet our 23 projections
So
for the local taxes.
So I think you're saying in a way that's difficult for me to understand, but so you're saying that that unless we grow at 4.4%, we're going to have a shortfall in 2023. And if we go at a historic average, which is like 3.5%, right, that we will have a 1% shortfall? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you interpreted that correctly. However, there are some of the categories that we expect to exceed. I mean, sales tax is one of the, so these.
Saying in the totality, like I don't need to break it apart, but so, or is that what you're saying in totality?
So this doesn't include the real estate tax. These are just the local taxes, which make up a quarter
Okay.
of the budget.
Okay.
And real estate taxes are 60% of the budget, so it's not going to be 1% off the
Gotcha.
total budget.
And in
but
terms of your estimates for real estate growth, what are your projections for that?
Let me pull out my crystal ball. No. The assessors of the region have started meeting. The numbers are nowhere close to what we had seen as of the January 1st, 2022 assessed value, but it's still very, very early in the game to nail down a number quite yet. At the next Budget and Finance Committee on November 18th, I hope to have a little bit better understanding of what we are looking into. Of course, the little city can be outlier to some of the larger jurisdictions, but it's good to hear what's happening around, and we'll have some more information on that.
I mean, the number's going to get set right in 2.5 months. We may not quote report it, but the reality is January 1 is the day that you set the numbers. So it's not too far from us. I think echoes words of caution that interest rates have got to catch up with the real estate market. You can't have interest rates double in a year and expect that home prices will continue on the same trajectory. I just think that you just can't have that. And inflation also, I think, is a pretty big distortion in the market. And frankly, Arpa funds that we've received over these past years have been great, but I think they've kind of distorted our numbers as well, and our thinking of spending and how we've been able to plug some holes maybe that otherwise would have been pretty difficult to plug otherwise. And so I think we need to really be thinking about, what's that? Yeah, and so I think that's something we need to give some thought to as well. And I'm not sure exactly how to do that in a systemic and rational way, but it just on its face, it appears that it's really helped out an awful lot for us, and it's going to start winding down here pretty soon as well. So anyway, thank you. I know this is a continuing conversation. This is the first cut at it today. Wyatt, do you think we can get through these next items, these consent items quickly, or do we need to take a break and get back at it?
I believe we can. Maybe.
All right, let's do it.
Maybe I'll just do a quick roll through of them, and if there are questions and we see it's going to be more complicated, we.
All right, let's do it.
And I'm sorry, my computer just shut down. Let me get logged back in.
It's on the screen as well.
Okay. So the first item is the Arts Grants Awards. Place that on consent calendar. Just to summarize the numbers, there's $17,300 for arts projects and $29,827, which includes the state $4,500 grant for operations. And so that includes the Creative Cauldron operations grant and other things that the council is used to seeing. So this recommendation, the reason it would just go on consent is because this did get worked over very thoroughly by the Arts and Humanities Council.
Hey, Wyatt, it did include an item for watch night.
It did, yes, 5,000.
And is that, do you have an update on that?
So, the VPAS is working to organize the music and other venues for watch night. We have had discussions of other groups that could be involved in this, and we don't have anyone yet. We are looking just in terms of helping to organize it to see, one of the discussions we can have with council is whether we would have some additional paid assistance for that. But that would be something that if we were to do that, we would then come back to council to kind of get that reimbursed.
So we better thinking about that pretty soon, Wyatt. I mean, we're almost
Yeah,
at,
I mean, there is a plan in motion, but maybe we can talk offline about that.
all right, well, let's just try to accelerate the planning. Yes, of course.
I just want to express my grave concern at the fact that there's about eight or 10 weeks until New Year's Eve, and your Parks and Rec staff is low, and there's a lot of demands on staff. So I would say if the demands on staff are too much and there's not a person who's able to do this, that I would start putting it off again this year, or holding something smaller with concerts, but not blocking down the streets at midnight and doing something earlier, if that is a reasonable alternative. Because I do feel like it's a big burden on staff that we may not be able to accomplish.
I don't know, I guess just to offer a counterpoint, and I understand the concern, but it's just such a great thing, you'd hate to lose it or let it slip away. So I don't know what the answer is, but whatever it is, we need to get on it ASAP.
The answer is professional event planning. That's not staff, given the resources.
And what else you got, Wyatt?
So the next item is our existing fuel contract, and we procure that through COG. Fuel prices have been going up, and so we are asking for a retroactive appropriation to meet some of those cost increases on the fuel side. We have a request to purchase 2 vehicles, and these are heavy trucks. This is our ongoing fleet replacement program. We did have money budgeted in FY23. Of course, the costs have gone up, and we've used underspending to help close that gap. But these, each truck, we're asking for 2 trucks. Each is approximately $200,000. So this is a $400,000 contract approval request that we're making for these vehicles. I will just say briefly, staff continues to look at electric vehicles and see what the capacity is. These particular vehicles are used every day, but they are also used for big storms, snow emergencies, and debris removal. And so it is staff recommendation. Sometimes these trucks have to run for 4 or 5 days straight, where just shifts come and go, and the truck is never turned off essentially during those big events. And so that's kind of the main stumbling block for an electric vehicle. Also, during these types of events, sometimes the electric grid itself is not available, and so having the ability to charge batteries is compromised. So that's the thought process for staff. We understand that this conversion is important, but I just share that thinking and that kind of crucial part of the scope for purchasing this type of equipment.
Wyatt, a question. Have you, as you are with the fuel contract, have you reached out to COG to see if other jurisdictions have been able to acquire vehicles of this kind that are electric?
We are in pretty regular communication with COG just to find out what the best practices are on this. Cindy's been working on this with Andy Young, and maybe she has some additional information.
Thank you. That's a really important question, and we're looking really carefully, COG in the region, and that's part of, besides Andy working on the energy plan, he's working with Public Works on vehicles. Right now, there's not a lot of EV or hybrid in that heavy equipment, but the technology is changing, so we're monitoring that closely. I do want to note that while these are not EVs or hybrid, the work that Public Works is doing is being able to take these 2 trucks to do what 4 trucks used to do, so we are able to reduce the overall fleet in our transition to a more energy efficient fleet. The work continues, but we're not quite there yet.
So I would encourage you all to take a hard look, because it seems like there's always kind of a reason why not. I think we need to get to yes, and why. To my mind, there's ways around things, whether it's a generator when the electricity goes out. I mean, we probably should have multiple generators when electricity goes out for all sorts of reasons. And so I don't know. I guess I think we should really try to get ourselves transitioned over and not be the last to do it, but the first to electric vehicles. So anyway, for whatever it's worth, I would strongly encourage you to try to find a way to start us down that direction a little more aggressively. What else you got?
We have an expansion of our sanitary sewer collection system, and we do that through pipe bursting. And so this is to be able to collect the sanitary sewage from the West End area, but also is, part of the sewer shed includes Founders Row and Founders Row 2. This is a $5 million contract. This work is paid for by developer fees. Expansion of the system is generally, we try to have that always be paid for by developers as opposed to by ratepayers. The original estimate for this work was $4 million. With cost escalations, our current estimate, which does include a 10% contingency, even though we do now have final pricing, so that 10% is on top of the final pricing, is now just over $5 million.
Sorry, how much did you just say?
So the overall contract for this pipe bursting contract is $5 million.
So it went from 4 million to 5 million.
And then the last item on consent is the winter housing shelter, and that's something we look at every year, and the council approves every year. They are looking to open on December 1st. They had been opening on November 15th in recent years, but I think they're having some difficulties with volunteers. So they are targeting December 1 to open the hypothermia shelter. Those are the items on that we'd ask for the consent calendar next week.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Shields, yes.
Are there any other changes to the homeless shelter agreement, or is it the same
No,
number of
that's
people,
it.
everything else the same?
That's right.
Okay.
All right, let's move on to council schedule, requests, comments. Anybody have anything there?
I could ask, in renewing the franchise agreements to the cable operators, or maybe not connected to that, but Cindy, what's our status on Wi-Fi in, our parks and community center? And are we in a position to offer public Wi-Fi access at locations like that around town, either on our own or in conjunction with our franchise agreement partners?
Right now, in terms of city facilities, we have public Wi-Fi, as you noted, at the community center and at the library and at City Hall. Under our franchise agreements, there's no requirement for our communication providers to provide Wi-Fi throughout the city. Cox in particular does have a pretty robust program. If you're a Cox member, that you can use their hotspots anywhere, and they release regularly programs for school access, and I've just forwarded that over to the schools, and they've been sharing that. I think the bigger challenge is just the cost and trying to do a citywide program if you wanted to stand that up, along with the conversion to newer technology that's evolving, and of course some limit on state code. But we do not have a formal program where the city or our franchise providers are doing a citywide deployment.
So currently, if you're in one of the city parks, you're basically relying on the Cox Wi-Fi network, which is the one that at least my phone picks up whenever I'm running around.
Correct.
Which is iffy sometimes in terms of service. Okay. Well, talk about being at the forefront of leadership. That would be a good thing to be a leader on. What about, what's my other question? We talked about, Mr. Brown's Park maintenance, Kaiser trash cans, just sort of general update on how our public works folk are able to keep up with maintenance around town. Is anybody, I've heard a couple of comments, and I just wonder if, is it a staffing issue, or have any thoughts about that?
Well, so trash can pickup, that's ADS, and so, whenever there are complaints about that, we get we call ADS and can generally address those. I'm not aware of issues at Mr. Brown's Park.
And is that, does ADS cover the Kaiser Garage?
So inside the garage is covered by Insight. There are cans on the entranceway to the garage, and those are part of our ADS contract. And there was a complaint, or maybe just an observation, that they were full today. And so Becky has been calling to see if ADS can get out there to pick those up. We're very sensitive to that relationship
Yeah,
with Kaiser. We want
For obvious
them to
reasons.
be happy with us as they're allowing the public to use that garage.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's obviously an important relationship. And finally, what is our status of our advertising arrangement with the news press? A city section or something. We talked about that earlier. Where do we stand on that now?
So we are basically in a posture of just trying to be using the Falls Church News Press for paid advertisement for public service announcements, which we're doing. In terms of having a regular page every week, we have not gotten to that point. The schools were doing it last spring, and I don't know if they've continued that into this fall. But at any rate, that's an ongoing point of discussion in terms of how that might look going forward with the local newspaper.
Okay. Well, depending on, we have some big events coming up. I think the festive lighting of the trees and hopefully some version of Watch Night. There might be some big community events coming up here in the winter months that it would be good to let the public know about. That'd be an opportunity to, at minimum, do some advertising, if not more. Okay, thank you.
All right, anything else? Ms. Conley?
Miss Mester just passed around these pictures of the Transit Plaza that Gary Mester took. They're just beautiful pictures. And if you haven't been to the Transit Plaza, I would just check it out. It's really very well done. And you can park on Maple Avenue near the Henderson's house and cut through the parking lot there and get right across the street on those very narrow crosswalks across our intersections. Super safe feeling. And really, really good piece of history for the city. So kudos to the staff who made that happen. It's really a great asset.
So we've been looking to schedule a ribbon cutting for that project, and we wanted to wait until the trees had all been replaced by the contractor at the contractor's expense. So we will get that scheduled now.
All right, anything else? Ms. Hiscott?
Yes, I just wanted to follow up and see if we'll have either a resolution or proclamation next week on the keeping kids safe in schools and respect. We talked about mirroring what the school system had done in terms of a announcement and proclamation. I think that was on the working on this week topic.
It was, and it was kind of characterized as a letter that would join with the school's letter, which, but if, the format of it, whether we want to do it by proclamation or by a letter that the council
format,
signs.
the content is most important, and that it's communicated to our full community so they know that we support everyone. So personally, whether that's a letter or proclamation or a resolution or whatever the right nomenclature is, it's the intent and the communication of that that's most important. So whatever is most appropriate.
Yeah, on that note, it'd be a great opportunity to talk about the Rec and Parks transgender policy that was adopted in their last meeting and kind of how we are supporting our transgender kids. Two things. The rescheduled community cleanup from last month is this Saturday from 10 to 12. I had proposed that council get together and do it as a nice community service project. If you all are available, just send me an email so I can let Lonnie know how many of us will show up. We can get a street assigned. Maybe we can go to the Transit Plaza area. Second thing, Wyatt, can we talk offline about GovOps for the 25th?
Okay.
And what you might want to have proposed. There was one other thing now. I forget, so. Oh, yeah, city attorney interviews, I think, are scheduled for the 26th, right? Like the first half of Wednesday, so make sure everyone has that on their calendar as well.
If you can get some food too for that, it's going to be a long morning. So. All right, anything else anybody has? All right, what do we call an evening? Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
thank you,
We'll
council.
see each other soon.